Ever stop to think about what's actually humming away inside our gadgets? The unsung heroes.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're diving deep into something you probably haven't heard much about, but it's absolutely essential for all the wireless tech we use. Surface Acoustic Wave resonators,
Well,
SAW-W resonators.
yeah, sounds pretty technical, right? But they're incredibly important.
And we're going to try and make sense of it all.
We're using the Global Surface Acoustic Wave Saw Resonator Market Report 2025 as our guide today. It's packed with details on where this tech is now and where it's headed.
Right. So think of this as your quick but thorough guide to a surprisingly big industry.
Exactly.
Our mission really is just to unpack what these SAW resonators actually do, why they're becoming such a big deal, and what this report tells us about the market, the growth, the trends, all that stuff.
We want you to feel informed, not buried in jargon.
Definitely.
And just to start, the market size itself is pretty telling. For 2025, we're talking about a global market worth USD 1820 million.
Wow, okay, so already nearly $2 billion.
That's the foundation, yeah. But the really interesting part is the projection. By 2033, it's expected to hit USD 344.9 million.
So more than double.
More than double. That's a compound annual growth rate, CAGR, of 9.80% starting from 2025.
And the main reason behind that surge?
Our seemingly endless demand for wireless everything.
Makes sense.
And if we look at the regions for 2025, North America, it's got a big piece of the pie, USD 345.80 million. That's, over 37% market share?
Suggests they adopted it pretty early, maybe in things like IoT or defense.
Could be. Europe's also strong, USD 400.40 million, holding more than 29% of the market.
But the real powerhouse seems to be Asia-Pacific.
Oh, absolutely. In 2025, they're leading with a huge USD 891.80 million, and crucially, they're also tagged for the fastest growth, an 11.3% CAGR.
Currently around 24% share, but growing fast. That really points to a booming tech scene over there.
Definitely. And it's not just those three. We're seeing good growth elsewhere, too. South America, about USD 69 million, going at 10.2%. The Middle East, around USD 73 million, 10.3% growth.
Even Africa starting smaller at about USD 40 million, but still growing at a solid 9.5%.
Shows the demand is pretty global.
Yeah. And one other little tidbit from the intro numbers, the fastest growing type is the two-port SAW resonator. We'll need to circle back to why that is.
Wheel.
Okay, so impressive numbers all around. But to really get why this market is booming, we need the basics. What exactly is a SAW resonator doing?
Right. So imagine a tiny device. Its job is basically filtering and shaping electrical signals.
Yeah.
But it does this using sound waves.
Sound waves on a chip.
Exactly. On the surface of a special material, a piezoelectric material like quartz, maybe, or lithium niobate, these materials have this really cool property. You hit them with electricity, they vibrate, they create a tiny acoustic wave right on the surface.
Surface Acoustic Wave. Okay, the name makes sense now.
Precisely. This wave travels across the surface, and then you can convert it back into an electrical signal at the other end.
So it's like a translator, electricity to vibration and back again.
That's a great way to put it. And because of how this process works, you get incredibly precise control over the frequency of the signal. That's absolutely critical for wireless stuff, preventing interference, making sure data gets through cleanly.
And the advantages?
Well, they're small, they perform really well, and importantly, they're relatively cheap to make. That's a powerful mix.
Small, effective, affordable.
Got it. So where are these little guys hiding in plain sight?
Oh, everywhere, really. Crucial in cars, think remote key fobs, making sure they work reliably. They're fundamental in radio transmitters, and just countless wireless communication devices.
Like in my phone.
Definitely in your phone, filtering out signals you don't want, your smartwatch, enabling that connection, lots of places.
Okay, the demand picture is getting clearer. What are the report's main points on what's driving this growth? The key engines, so to speak. Well, the number one driver, no surprise, is just the explosion of wireless communication everywhere. Think about consumer electronics, healthcare going more remote with telehealth, cars getting smarter, even aerospace.
Everything's cutting the cord.
Right. And as that happens, the need for efficient signal filtering just skyrockets. And SAW-W resonators fit the bill, perfectly low power use, very reliable, and, as we said, tiny.
It really feels like we add a new wireless gadget every week.
We practically do. And
Yeah.
It's not just, general connectivity. The report specifically mentions a UBS forecast. They see a USD 30 billion market just for sensor semiconductors in self-driving cars by 2030.
30 billion,
Yeah.
just for sensors and autonomous vehicles.
Yeah. And so W sensors are really well positioned here. Why? Because they can measure things like pressure or temperature on parts that are spinning without wires, and crucially, they aren't bothered by all the electromagnetic noise inside a modern car.
Ah, that electromagnetic interference immunity, that's a big deal in a vehicle packed with electronics.
It's a huge advantage over other sensor types in that environment.
Okay, that makes sense. What's the other main driver the report points to?
It's the growing demand from industrial settings for SAW-based temperature sensors. Think automotive, medical manufacturing, chemical plants. They all need really accurate, reliable temperature monitoring.
And SAW sensors deliver that.
They do. They offer great accuracy over a wide range, they respond quickly, they're affordable, and they give consistent readings time after time. That means more dependable processes, less wear and tear leading to lower replacement costs, and better safety overall.
So, from our phone signals to industrial safety and self-driving cars, pretty versatile little components. But surely there are limitations. Nothing's perfect, right?
That's true. The report does flag a key constraint, bandwidth limitations.
Hmm.
Basically, the range of frequencies they can handle effectively.
Okay, so there's a limit to how much data they can process quickly.
For certain applications, yes, it
Yeah.
can restrict their use in some high-end signal processing or really high-speed wireless transmission where you need massive bandwidth.
And making them smaller doesn't necessarily help with that.
Not easily. The report notes that scaling them down further is tricky because their bandwidth is kind of tied to their physical size. That's definitely an area where research is ongoing.
Right? Ongoing R&D. Speaking of which, what are the big trends shaping the future here?
Well, that ongoing technological advancement is a major trend. There's a lot of R&D focused on pushing past those current limits, meeting the tougher demands of next-gen wireless sensing, signal processing. That innovation keeps opening doors.
Always pushing the envelope in tech. What else?
The other big one highlighted is the huge potential in the automotive sector. We talked about sensors for autonomous driving, but it goes beyond that.
Right.
The whole industry is hungry for new sensor tech, better safety systems. And with consumers and governments both pushing harder for vehicle safety, these acoustic wave sensors become really critical for things like cutting accident rates, just making cars safer.
So the car of the future is going to rely even more heavily on these SAGATA devices. Okay. Now, the report title, it mentioned Liberation Day tariffs. That sounds potentially disruptive.
Yes, it definitely was. The report explains these were tariffs put in place back in 2025. The stated aims were, fixing trade imbalances, reducing reliance on foreign supply chains.
Rates?
They varied quite a bit, from around 10% on some allies up to, well, much higher figures like 46% on goods from Vietnam, 34% from China. Plus, there were universal tariffs slapped on steel, aluminum, auto parts.
And electronics got hit hard.
Very hard. It's singled out as one of the most affected sectors, largely because of the U.S.-China trade friction. Tariffs on Chinese electronic goods went up dramatically. I think the report mentions up to 145% for some semiconductors and consumer electronics.
145%. Wow.
Yeah. And China, of course, retaliated with its own duties up to 125%, plus restrictions on exporting critical minerals needed for electronics. It really shook up the just-in-time supply chains and drove up component costs.
Can you give some specific tariff examples?
Sure. Like 25% on semiconductors generally, 20% on lithium-ion batteries, maybe 10-15% on things like laptops and tablets.
Which likely meant higher prices for consumers.
Often, yes, and potentially lower demand as a result. It put pressure on all sorts of subsectors: home automation, computer hardware, communications gear, medical devices, industrial electronics, all facing higher input costs, sourcing delays.
So how did electronics companies cope with all this?
Well, the report says they really had to scramble. They started looking hard for suppliers outside the tariff zones. India, Mexico, Vietnam were mentioned as key alternatives.
Diversifying the supply chain.
Exactly. And some even tried redesigning products to use components that weren't subject to the highest tariffs. But, China was still a massive supplier. USD 119 billion in electronics exports to the U.S. in 2023 alone.
So you couldn't just switch overnight.
No way. And even if you source from, say, Vietnam, some of the subcomponents might still have originated in China, so the impact rippled through. U.S. firms, many running on thin margins, saw input costs jump maybe 18–25%. And manufacturers in those alternative countries struggled to scale up fast enough.
Sounds like a real headache. What role did market research play in navigating that?
It became absolutely critical. Companies needed solid intel to find and check out new suppliers, track wildly fluctuating component costs, figure out how to optimize designs around tariffs, predict how price hikes might affect demand, and just keep up with the changing rules.
So data was key.
Hugely. Tools like supplier mapping, figuring out where everything really came from, optimizing the bill of materials, or BM to find cost-effective swaps running scenarios. These became essential survival tools.
Any examples?
Yeah, the report mentions big names like Apple and Dell actively expanding manufacturing outside China, and companies investing heavily in digital supply chain tools for better visibility and control.
Makes sense. You need good information to make good decisions in that kind of environment. Okay, shifting focus slightly, who are the actual companies making these SASOB resonators? What's the competitive scene like?
It's described as highly competitive. You've got a mix of big global players and more specialized regional companies.
Who are some of the key names mentioned?
Let's see. Taisai Technology, Murata Manufacturing, that's a big one, Qualcomm, Geyer Electronics, Rolltron, SATA Components, Vanlong, ECS Inc., Advanced Crystal Technology, Abracon LLC, Gollage Electronics. Quite a list.
A diverse field. What keeps them competitive? How do they stand out?
Usually it's a combination of things. Having a wide range of innovative products is key. Strong global distribution networks to get those products out there, and critically, continuous R&D to stay ahead of the curve technologically and meet what the market needs next.
Innovation and reach, basically.
Yeah. The report even points out a specific partnership, Farnell and ECS Inc., teaming up in September 2021 to broaden ECS's global distribution. Strategic moves like that matter.
Interesting. So let's go back to the regions. We said Asia-Pacific was dominant in 2025 and projected for fastest growth. Why is that exactly?
Well, the dominance in 2025 comes down to the sheer concentration of major tech firms and R&D hubs there. It's just fertile ground for innovation, applying solid tech in areas like satellite communications, mobile devices, which are huge there, IoT, and the automotive sector, especially for things like keyless entry and car communication systems.
A real ecosystem for this technology.
Exactly. And the reason for the fastest growth projection? It's a combination of factors stacking up.
Like what?
You've got massive consumer demand for electronics phones, wearables driven by a growing middle class. You have a booming automotive sector, especially with the push towards connected and electric vehicles in places like China, Japan, India.
Right. EVs and connected cars need more sensors.
Tons more. Plus, the aggressive 5G rollout across Asia-Pacific, the general rise of IoT in homes and industry, a very strong manufacturing base already in place, and government initiatives pushing digitization. It all fuels demand for SAW resonators.
It really sounds like a convergence of growth drivers there. What about specific countries driving things in other regions?
Well, in North America, the U.S. is obviously key, driven by IoT adoption and 5G build-out. Over in Europe, you see countries like the UK and Germany pushing forward with industrial automation and advanced automotive electronics.
And in APAC, besides the giants,
China is huge, driven by both industrialization and that massive consumer market. India's demand for affordable gadgets and its growing auto sector are significant too. Even in South America, Brazil's automotive electronics demand contributes to that region's growth.
okay, that gives a good flavor of the global picture. Now, the report also breaks down the market by resonator type, frequency, and the industries using them. Let's start with type. One-port versus two-port. We heard two-port is growing fastest. What's the deal there?
Right, so one-port resonators likely had the bigger market share in 2025. They're kind of the workhorse, simpler design, cost-effective, reliable for basic frequency control and filtering.
Like a single lane for the signal. In and back out.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
They're widely used in consumer gadgets, cars, telecom base stations, mobile devices, lots of standard applications.
The established choice for many things.
Exactly. But the two-port type is where the faster growth is. Think of this one as having separate on and off ramps for the signal distinct input and output ports.
Ah, okay.
This design gives them better performance, higher sensitivity, better signal-to-noise ratio, more stable frequency control. That makes them essential for more demanding jobs.
Such as?
High-end medical equipment, advanced 5G network gear where performance is critical, complex IoT devices. The 5G rollout specifically is really boosting demand for these high-performance two-port resonators.
Got it. Separate pathways for better performance. Now, how about the frequency segments? 300, 500 megahertz versus above 700 megahertz.
Okay, the 300, 500 megahertz range, that held the largest share. It's sort of the sweet spot, offering a good balance of performance and cost.
Yeah.
Very versatile.
So used in a lot of different things.
Yeah, tons of telecom applications, satellite links, base stations, mobile devices again. Also common in consumer electronics like wearables, smartphones, smart home stuff where you need efficiency and small size.
And the higher frequencies, above 700 megahertz.
That segment's growing rapidly. You need these higher frequencies for the really cutting-edge stuff, 5G, advanced IoT, high-spec medical devices. Why? Because higher frequencies generally mean lower latency, faster data transfer.
Which is key for 5G especially.
Absolutely. The 5G build-out is a major driver here. Plus, the constant push to make devices smaller and perform better means these higher-frequency SAW resonators are increasingly finding their way into the newest smartphones, tablets, even gaming consoles.
Interesting how frequency unlocks different capabilities. Okay, finally, the end-use industries. Who's the biggest user of SAW resonators?
Telecommunications. By far the largest share in 2025. Makes sense, right? Wireless communication fundamentally relies on filtering signals and controlling frequencies precisely.
Everything from the network towers to the phone in your hand.
Exactly. Satellite comms, base stations, mobile devices, they all need SAW resonators. And the ongoing 4G, 5G expansion plus the IoT boom just keep driving that demand.
Makes perfect sense. And which industry is growing the fastest in its use of them?
That would be automotive. We've touched on this, but the trend towards electric and connected vehicles is creating a huge surge in demand.
Where exactly in the car are they showing up more?
All over, really. Tire pressure monitoring systems, TPMS, keyless entry, the V2X communication letting cars talk to each other in infrastructure, advanced driver assistance systems, ADAS.
Lane keeping, emergency braking.
Right. And the sensors underpinning autonomous driving capabilities. Plus, they're increasingly used in infotainment and navigation systems, too. The modern car is just packed with applications for them.
So the future of how we get around is also tied up with these SIW resonators.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground here. What are the absolute key things listeners should take away from this deep dive?
I'd say three main things. First, just how fundamental these SIW resonators are. They're like the hidden plumbing enabling our wireless world. Second, the sheer scale of the market growth, really pushed by wireless and automotive needs. And third, that regional picture, especially Asia-Pacific, really driving innovation and growth right now. Definitely. It's amazing how these tiny, often overlooked components have such a massive impact. So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. As this tech keeps evolving and our world gets even more connected, where else might we see these little acoustic wave devices pop up?
That's a good question.
Maybe if they overcome those bandwidth limits, what new applications could that unlock? It's certainly something to keep an eye on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.